What's up and welcome back. I'm John Stark from MacTheMovieGuy.com, your favorite blind film critic. That's right, I'm a blind film critic. So disability representation already present in this review, and we're going to double down with a review of Deaf President Now. This movie premiered at the 2025 Sundance Film Festival, where it was presumably acquired by Apple because it's premiering on Apple this May 16th. Check it out. It's a documentary that really just explores a real life event that actually happened at a deaf university, Gallaudet University, and breaks that down in fine form. Interestingly, not the first time this year that I've reviewed a movie that has talked about this event at Gallaudet University. Earlier this year, I reviewed a documentary short called Change Not Charity, which was also a disability-centric documentary, which is why I reviewed it, because I'm a blind film critic. So not only am I here to talk about audio description in film, so you should subscribe to me, but I'm also representation, which matters because blind film critics don't exist. How do I know they don't exist? Because I do. And I keep getting screeners that don't have audio description. I keep getting screener platforms that are not designed for screen readers. They just don't believe anybody who's visually impaired exists within the medium that would either be receiving these screeners for critical consideration or for awards consideration, which extends to guilds, which I think is such a huge leap whenever you're sending stuff out, that you think across all of the guilds, all of those voting bodies, no one is visually impaired and would benefit from access. I love these companies. Great. Great thoughts on that, by the way. Apple's screening room is atrocious, their app, which is hilarious because even if you use it on an Apple platform, it does not know. It cannot read. So it's not even well designed Apple to Apple. Like they just didn't bother. So, and that's kind of what I get a lot of in terms of representation. So when I see a film like Deaf President Now that screams from the disability community, hey, look at me, here's a story we want you to know about that we should tell, I think to myself, this is fucking great. I'm really excited to be here right now. And as soon as I saw Deaf President Now floated to me in an email for early consideration, I was like, I should be at the front of the line of the critics on this. I know I'm not. I don't have 2 million views or anything like that, but shouldn't disability-centric critics be the ones talking about disability films also? I mean, shouldn't this also be the brand? Uh, I I think so. There aren't that many of us, and I know disability is a spectrum, so which disabilities are you encountering? Well, I would say ones that, kind of uh, maybe understand the different accessibility, uh, you know, leaps that the world keeps trying to get us to make and thrust upon us, and the expectations, and also just the idea of what we are able to do and not able to do, what we can and can't do. And all of that leads to why a bunch of students at a university stood up and said, enough is enough. Why the fuck haven't we had a deaf president at a transitional period in the school's history, when the board was voting on three candidates. They had three candidates. They had two of them were deaf and had applied to be the new president of the university, and one of them was was able to hear, and ultimately the board went with hearing. And this documentary perfectly captures all of the interviews from the president of the board. I don't even know what her name is, but I hate her. Uh, saying all this stuff about, the decision, and something about how deaf people aren't ready for the real world. And it's just so so ableist and so offensive to tell people that they can't reach as high as being the president of a university designed for deaf people, like their own university. They're not, this isn't like Harvard that just like woke up one morning and was like, oh, you know what? We should have a deaf president of Harvard. Not that there couldn't be, but this is people asking to be represented by their own people. You know what I'm saying? This would be like a documentary about Howard University, uh, and their students wondering why the president of their college is always white. You know, it's kind of like it's you wouldn't do that. Like at some point people would immediately understand, wait a minute, why, that's a HBCU, why are they being run by a white dude? Uh that's why we don't have a historical uh movie documentary about that, because it just sounds asinine when you say it out loud. So why doesn't it for a deaf college? Like why doesn't it? I can sort of understand maybe foundationally when you found a university and it's like the beginning of education for deaf people in America, which thanks to Abraham Lincoln started. Uh yeah, in Abraham Lincoln's time. One of the many things that he did right was also to establish the first university for deaf students. So I can understand then, at the beginning, to help get it started and get the ball rolling, and then you get somebody educated up to the point where they can then run the college themselves, and then you step away. But Jesus Christ, this is like the 1980s. Like, what is the point of the education you've been giving these people if you're saying that they could never reach the level of which they can run their own college? Like, uh, it'd be like, I don't know, training a whole bunch of people, having a surgeon train a whole bunch of people to be doctors, and then being like, well, none of you guys will ever be allowed to cut. Then why are we here? Like, I don't know. It just, they're never going to be able to do it. I don't, it's this thing. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me either, but it's just, I guess there's this invisible barrier between you and me. I'm better than you. Really, that's what that's saying. And that's what the messaging was this whole time from the board of Gallaudet University was, we can hear and we're better than you. And we've come to your own school to tell you that in the most directly offensive way possible, which is to consistently choose somebody who is inappropriate for the job, which they do here. And hilariously, she can't even sign. This isn't even somebody who's like just like well-meaning and coming in and being like, my whole family was deaf and I was a coda, child of deaf adults. For people who didn't see that movie. It's not even like that, where somebody is just acutely aware of the situation, or maybe they're hearing impaired, right? Maybe they use hearing aids and they also sign. So they're like adjacent to the community. I think maybe that would have seemed as progress. It wouldn't have quite created the thunderstorm that they would have at least been like, we're moving in the right direction. Next president will be, you know. No, no, she's just got like a nursing degree. She's like, I'm here to be president with a nursing degree. I love the fact that nowadays we have things like deaf studies and deaf culture that you could major in an ASL in college, that people can actually be educated about that. The interesting difference between deaf culture and blind culture is one exists and the other does not. Blind culture is not really a thing. We have yet to actually sort of connect as a populace, as a people. And we still have sort of hangups about uh, our levels of accessibility, what we should and shouldn't use, what people are telling us, well, normalize, don't use that. And they kind of talk about that here in Deaf President Now, which is one of the things that I love about this movie, is that it's not just about the college. You also talk about how they were raised and how some of them had parents that forced them to go to, quote, regular school. I hate using that term. I don't know what else, like public, but there should be public schools that take, I mean, I don't know, non deaf specific schools. There we go. Schools without a direct focus on the education of deaf students. So they would force their kids to go to those, and uh, they, wouldn't have the accessibility. They don't have a translator, interpreter, that nobody to, so they're forced to lip read, and that is, and some of it is passed down generationally too. There was one guy who had a father who was an engineer and had gone his whole life having to lip read, and thought his kid should have to do that too. I don't know. This is kind of like just putting blind kids in school without them being having any access to Braille, especially at a time where now we have a lot of technology on our phones with screen readers, but I can't even imagine like the gap in not being able to see, or just asking blind people to walk down a hallway without their cane because the cane makes them disabled. Just use, I don't know, the force to walk. I have no idea. I avoided that luckily, but um, it's it does directly address openly, this ableist view, and also how when you propagate ableist ideas, their own community picks it up. Like the disabled community of which the ableist ideas are being thrust upon, that there are people within that who then start to believe that that is all that's ever possible for them, and that that is what they need to do in order to survive, is to quote unquote normalize themselves. So these students who have largely looked for an opportunity to finally gather, be together, to learn in an environment that is designed for them, so that they can be themselves and not be the odd one out all the time, and not have to struggle to worry about whether or not they can and can't use sign language and use accessibility and captioning and TT services. I think I missed that up. That's text to speech. Uh, I'm used to saying TTS because of, but I think it might still be TTS. I'm used to saying it because of the form of audio description, which is also sometimes shorted as AI when it's not a human narrator. But the fact that everybody gathers at these schools, and that uh, representation matters. It's something I talk about a lot in terms of audio description and knowing who somebody is. These audio description tracks that are created and try to sort of gender just neutralize the entire cast so that you don't know who anybody is racially. Like everything is just ethnically cleansed in a movie. Even an intentionally diverse cast is never described. Disney does this a lot, where they get praise from sighted audiences for their bold choices in diversity. But then when it comes down to audio description, they go out of their way to forbid the description of ethnicities or race in their characters. And in shows like Percy Jackson and the Olympians, or even recently Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, they intentionally cast and then got praised for it externally, but within the blind community, we have no idea what those people look like. So it gets kind of lost. And then the idea, I guess, is that, I don't know, blind kids don't need to see representation because they're not blind and Black, or blind and Latino, or blind and, blank. So they're just not represented in the film at all, and largely in media across things. So when we don't see the representation, or the people out there doing things, we believe we can't do them, and that starts off, it's at gender level, it's at racial level, but it's also a disability level. If we see people who can't do it in terms of disability, then we believe that there's a cap or a ceiling and it's just below that and it's below everybody else. And for some things it is. Like, I'm not arguing to be an air traffic controller. Pause for uh people who remember when blind people were being blamed for plane crashes earlier this year. Bueller. Anyway, uh yeah, we're not trying to get into positions that would otherwise cause an actual safety issue, but like literally anything else, we should be able, like 99% of the jobs should be accessible actually to people because it's 2025 and not only do we have accessibility tools for deaf and blind people to be able to understand everything from the way, when you're like, well, how do deaf people know about sounds or alarms? Because of flashing lights, man, because they can see. So they're able to interpret warning lights and stuff like that to be able to see what is, coming their way. Uh, and instead of constantly being reliant upon doorbells or alarms. They have things set up in their home that visually let them react or otherwise, depending on the situation. So, again, it's 2025. We have AI. We're sending people into space for fun. Like, we're there. We just don't like to admit that we are, or we try to make things prohibitively expensive so that only the lucky few who are able to get the accessibility that they need because we keep it prohibitively expensive are the ones that seem to be able to achieve. So when you are at your own school and they say you can't have this, it means a lot. It means why, like, I can do all these studying, I can study all these books and get through all these classes, but I'll never be good enough to run my own school for my own people, is what you're saying. Because they had two well-educated candidates who were up against and then not. Uh, and they still went with not. They still went with somebody who was not part of that community and that culture. Why? Well, because the board is not that community and not that culture. And it's really easy to say that you care about and that you're there for all the right reasons. But when you have a sort of infantilizing approach to how you handle people with disabilities, it kind of reveals the fact that you're probably there more uh, for the effect of having that on your resume. The same reason the Sackler family keeps putting their name on art shit is so that they can, you know, it's the same thing. Yeah, I just compared this lady who's featured as the president of the board of directors to the Sackler family, but it kind of feels like the same thing. It kind of feels like somebody who is uniquely wealthy and positioned to be able to be on the board of directors who may not have really any care or cause or whatever, but she's going to use her status to attain her this position so that in society, she gets to go and tell people who aren't deaf, look what I do in my free time. And that's probably true of the whole board, to call it out. And especially in the 80s, when this is before the Americans with Disabilities Act. So they really just wanted to stand out and finally be represented. I've seen some interviews that they've done in and around, especially at Sundance, the production team involved with the film. And some of the stuff that they say is really important that isn't 100% included in the movie, where they talk about, like, why did they make this movie? And they talk about how a lot of the history involving disabled people is erased from the books. So kids aren't learning about Gallaudet. So they're not learning that there was a period in time where deaf students protested and got uh, made a historic change for themselves. They advocated for themselves uh, against all odds and forced meaningful change. There really isn't that. The whole story that Change Not Charity explores with the Rehabilitation Act and why that was so important, and the protests, the sit-ins, the challenge to Congress to actually force Section 504 to be uh, actually legally enforced, all of that pre-Americans with Disabilities Act. They just don't teach that in schools. Um, I think schools think, it's not important because, well, it represents a minority population. And when I was growing up as a kid, obviously we had stuff that represented, we had plenty of stuff about the Civil War and learning about slavery. And now we see that is being challenged, and they want to remove stuff like that from history books and teach people that slavery had positives, like there were good things. And we're constantly trying to chip away at what history is, which is simply just the things that actually happened. And we're trying to kind of present them in the way in the narrative that makes the most sense to the people who are in charge at the time. And the people who are in charge are rarely ever disabled. I constantly find myself having to advocate for my own accessibility needs with people who have no idea what accessibility is, why I need it, why they should provide it, what the benefit would be. So the idea of a blind film critic, like I've applied to Rotten Tomatoes. I know this is a long ass review, but I really wanted to talk about Deaf President Now for so many reasons. I applied to Rotten Tomatoes because they don't have a blind film critic. I know I don't meet the usual standards. I know that my viewership is low, and I'm going to always be niche because at the end of the day, a whole bunch of sighted people may find me to be a curiosity and check out my reviews, but at the end of the day, they're going to want to know from a sighted person, were the visual effects cool? Did stuff blow up really well? you know, uh, man, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if he looks realistic in that movie or not. I thought about it from every other perspective. So I thought about it from my perspective, which is the perspective of millions of Americans who are visually impaired, low vision, or blind. So uh, it's not a perspective that is somehow not important. Neither are deaf people. There should be deaf critics. I hope there are. And there should be deaf people everywhere. It's not just about having a deaf president now. It's about what saying deaf president now means. It's about pushing into somewhere where you previously have not been allowed and saying it's time. And nowadays, this is the perfect year to come out because there's such this push back against diversity, equity, inclusivity, as if it's some sort of a bad thing, when all it is saying that for years, people have stood up and said, you can't do this. This is not for you. We're not going to let you in the room. We're not going to interview you for the job. We're not going to do this, this, and this. So it's nice to think that we're all protected from discrimination or through reasonable accommodations, but it's really hard to ever prove that the reason that you weren't hired for a job was specifically because of your disability. You have multiple applicants and they can hire anybody. You show up into the room, I show up with a cane, or you show up as a deaf individual ready to sign, or however you present yourself in an interview. And it immediately reveals something about yourself, and that non-disabled person sitting behind the table has to decide, is this something I want to deal with? Is this something that I think our people should deal with or have to deal with, instead of is this person qualified for the job? Is this person the best? They immediately see the disability, and we fall back into the niche representation. We fall back into this little hole. A lot of people in the disabled community are ultimately employed by other people in disabled communities, or through accessibility or accessibility consultants. Like, it's almost like we have to propagate our own jobs because we can't get into other jobs. And the sad truth about Deaf President now is they're just asking to be the president of their own fucking college. They're not asking to be the president of Yale. They could be. Absolutely. Do I think Yale could have a blind, deaf, autistic, wheelchair bound, or otherwise disabled? Absolutely. Why not? It doesn't mean you're not intelligent. It doesn't mean you don't have 7,000 degrees and can't speak every language in the world. Like, why? How could you not be intensely qualified? But unfortunately, everybody always sees the disability. So when two men walk into the room who are deaf, trying to apply for a job at a school, that's what they saw. And then they had a woman who they could just talk to, who a board full of people who are not disabled were able to just sit down and talk to and say, she's one of us. She makes us comfortable. Fuck the student body. So I love the fact that this documentary exists. It's like one of my favorite things of the year. And I don't know how this isn't going to be on my year-end list. It's also has the privilege of being the 100th film I've seen released in 2025. Last year I hit 455. So I'm hoping to, and then after that I saw like Mufasa. So it's actually probably like 456 or 7 or 8 or something by now of titles I've seen that were released in 2024. Yeah, I like this movie a lot. I adore this movie. I love the fact that Apple's releasing it, considering they also released Coda, and feels like that they almost have a focus. However, I would also check them on several things from my blind perspective, not a deaf perspective. I mean, absolutely, we're not the same thing, but we all fall under this dome of disability. So while they may perfectly have no problem providing all this captioning and highlighting content for deaf people, I would love to point out the fact that last year they released 2 documentaries at the end of the year that had no audio description. And they also have a platform for screeners that has an atrocious screen reader. I can't even log in. Like, I can't, luckily through the website I was able to log in, but I cannot use the app. It does not read with a screen reader. It's not designed to be read by a screen reader. So it's impossible to log in without having a sighted person do it. And, I can't always do that. It's not like a genie where I rub the lamp and a sighted person pops out and it's like, oh my God. Thank you, sighted genie. Can you help me through this? Nah, not for that. So sometimes it's frustrating because there are some things I literally can't do because it's just not designed. It's on a screen. I can't read it. It's just to try to navigate and find the buttons, or will my screen reader even find that buttons exist? Like, is it, because in some things, screen readers just, it's almost like they're disabled. So I constantly run into these kind of barriers. And the hilarity is, I didn't actually watch this with audio description. I wanted to save that one for the end. My screener didn't have accessibility, which, heck yeah. We've come full circle, all the way back around to, we have a disability-centric documentary that is currently being screened because it thinks it's going to be screened for fully sighted individuals. And I understand, I don't know, I think there's a way that YouTube, like, AI captions things. I wish I knew how to do captioning or even understood, but then I'd be typing out everything I just said, I don't understand captioning for my stuff, so I realize I may not be the most accessible thing on in the world for deaf audiences, but I'm hoping that there's something out there because I know YouTube has tools. I don't know how they work from that perspective, but I know from my perspective that there was this sort of like hilarious set of roadblocks that didn't expect that a blind or low vision person would be, I guess, watching or screening a film about deaf people. But I want to support you guys so hard. Like you don't know. So, uh, Deaf President Now. I'll probably watch it again when it's on Apple, but not like right away. Uh, Probably closer to. I'm gonna give it some time before I rewatch it, but definitely I'll rewatch it because I think this. I think it's a tremendous film. I love the documentary anyway. And actually, I was thinking there are points in the film where somebody's not talking and it drops out, and I was like, that's kind of like having the deaf experience. I just also, unfortunately, am blind, so I don't know if they're visually showing you anything. So that's the other side is that a film like this is largely made as a visual medium for sighted people. So when I don't have audio description, granted I don't have sound, which is like having deaf, which is like being deaf, obviously, when there's the absence of sound, but also I have no sight. So whatever it is that you're showing on that screen at the time, I'm assuming the screen's not going black. Uh, I don't know what that is. So that's why we have audio description. That's why I need accessibility at the end of the day. So this is a long ass review, and I appreciate you if you stayed this long through it. I don't know why you did, but I love you, and hopefully you click like and subscribe because obviously you care what somebody with a disability has to say about a film about disabilities. I don't really care. This review can get one view or 500,000 reviews. I really don't, it doesn't matter to me one way or the other. I'm still going to review Deaf President Now. I'm still going to say what needs to be said for the same reason that those students stood outside Gallaudet University and did what they did because they felt like it was the right thing to do. Because if they didn't do it, then who else was going to do it? If I'm not here, then who else is? If I'm not on YouTube constantly talking about audio description accessibility in film and saying, I'm blind, I'm here, I have an opinion, it's important. I may not be the best choice, it may not be your favorite choice, but that's it. We're here. There should be options for blind film criticism in this world because blind people exist and we are humans. There should be deaf film critics as well. So there's no disabled film critics society. I'm trying to start a blind film critics society by finding and encouraging people who are blind and like cinema to review it. So I'm trying to populate so that tomorrow there'll be more of us. Thank you, Lin-Manuel Miranda. I love that quote. So, should you watch? Absolutely, you should watch this movie. It's like absolutely, please do. Yeah, this has my highest endorsement with even without audio description because it is it's so representational of everything that needs to be without like manipulating it emotionally and doing things that uh are sort of like an ableist view of deaf people. It sort of is like allowing them to tell their own story in a way that is productive and instead of using people as characters who are tropes in films. I'm sure deaf people are more aware of their specific tropes, but like for blind people, we're always like Sage, we have Second Sight, or we're like Daredevil. Those are like the tropes. You think I'm kidding, but there are a lot of blind people who have an inordinate ability to fight in combat. Rogue One, you know? So yeah, those are the tropes we constantly seem to face in film. So people think I can see the future or talk to ghosts or premonitions or something, or that I'm just wise beyond my years, or that I have special human abilities thanks to Daredevil. So it's representation from its own community telling their own story. Deaf President Now, disability films now, representation now, all of that. Yes, please. I'm giving Deaf President Now the rare grade of A+. I don't usually give films this grade. I certainly don't give it to films when I've usually been denied my accessibility, but it's a grade that I use to determine that I would take this movie to a desert island with me, and I would absolutely take this movie to a desert island with me. It's the strongest representation that I've seen in film about disability, and the fight for rights and representation and equality and equity. And I have yet to have anything that is quite this amazing. And I'm hoping one day that we have something that represents the blind community and our fight and our struggles, the same way that Deaf President Now does for deaf culture. So thank you for watching. Thanks for subscribing. And I'll see you guys on the other side.